Thanks, everybody. Welcome to Build. I'm your host, Ricky Kemmerer. One of the best plays of the year, definitely the best one-person show, is What the Constitution Means to Me by and starring Heidi Schreck. At the age of 15, Miss Schreck traveled across the Northwest, debating and lecturing about the Constitution. She used that money that she earned to go to college. Now, some years later, she's taken her adulthood, what she's witnessed happen in the world, her family's history, to apply a different perspective on the Constitution. The show is hilarious, at times heartbreaking, insightful, and deserving of every possible accolade that could be bestowed upon it. Please welcome the great Heidi Schreck. Let's hear it.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here. Hi.
I am so happy to get the chance to talk to you. I talk to a lot of people all day about movies and TV and plays, and every now and then you get someone who you've just witnessed their work and you feel like you've seen something genius. And I really feel like What the Constitution Means to Me is a genius work. It feels like something that was labored over for 40 years. And it was, because you've been thinking and talking about the Constitution since you were 15 years old, right?
Yes, which was a long time ago.
So when did you start rethinking about the Constitution and start thinking that it could be a kind of one-person show, which this kind of is, excuse me?
Yes, there are three of us, but I do take up a lot of the stage time. I started thinking about the project 10 years ago. I honestly don't remember why. At first, my idea was simple. I just wanted to make a play about this contest. I did as a 15-year-old. I thought it was an interesting premise for a play. And then as I began researching it, I started to go down some very interesting paths, both in terms of the history of our country and in terms of the history of my family and what had happened to the women in my family over many generations.
And your women end up, the women of your family in some ways end up representing not just the women of this country, but the way that minorities and those who are not rich white men who wrote the Constitution have been kind of treated or at the mercy of the Constitution over
yes,
the founding.
Or frankly, just left out of the Constitution or worse.
Yeah. Was it difficult for you to start including your family when you started having those ideas? Because it's very different to have those ideas and then to start writing it on paper and then performing it in front of an audience.
Yes, it was scary. So I grew up, I knew my family's stories from the time I was pretty young. About the time I was doing the contest at 15, I knew about the sort of legacy of domestic abuse and sexual assault in my family on my mom's side. And we grew up talking about these things openly. My mom was very actively supportive of other survivors and did a lot of advocacy. So I didn't think it would be a thing I was scared to talk about, but when I began to talk about it on stage, I actually realized I was terrified. I didn't realize how deeply I had internalized the taboo about talking about these kinds of things.
This is maybe a horrible question, excuse me.
Sure.
But when you go into the details of those stories on stage, it is heartbreaking. I was moved, I was crying, and you're crying on stage as well. And you're doing this every night. I mean, maybe do you do 2 shows a day sometimes as well?
Yeah.
So at this point, do you find that you are performing that, telling those stories, or is it still just kind of a very natural, it just comes out?
I don't, it's a good question. I don't attempt to feel any certain way while I'm telling the stories. And as you know, a lot of the play is funny. Like it goes down different kinds of paths. When I get to the part about my family history, I just try to tell the story as openly and clearly as possible and sort of go with whatever I'm feeling on any particular night.
The play is very much like this right now in the sense that it is smart, it is harrowing, but it is delivered with this really sweet smile the whole time that is just infectious. And like you can't, no matter where you're going, people are just following you and are completely wrapped up in what you're saying. I think you could have cursed us out and we would have been like, okay, Heidi, let's keep going.
Some nights I turn on the audience a little bit. If you're
Really?
like opening candy wrappers or something, I get a little nasty, yeah.
That must be thrilling that you've devised a kind of play where you can interact with the audience.
Yes, I love interacting with the audience during it. It's very fun for me, actually. I threw somebody a cough drop the other night. Someone was coughing a lot. It was bothering me, but then also I think they were suffering, so I have a bunch of cough drops on stage that I'll throw out to the audience.
Has your idea of the Constitution changed since you've been working on this? Not simply because of how you've been working on this, but in the last last 3 years, the way that this country has started to talk about the Constitution?
Yes, I think I mean, first of all, I never expected to be performing this play at this moment. So that has been kind of overwhelming. I first performed the play in 2015 when Obama was president. It was a very different time. But all the things I'm talking about in the play have been true for centuries. So things like the way people in this country have not been treated as full human beings since the beginning of our country. Now we're in a moment where it's being talked about it's just being talked about more and more openly.
Because we have an administration or a president that is a bit more flagrant in his violations of human rights on a daily basis.
Yes. So I guess what I learned about the Constitution while making it. First of all, the biggest thing I learned was, and I didn't realize this, is I mean, I knew our Constitution was it's the oldest working Constitution in the world. I didn't realize that how many countries had made new constitutions in the 20th and 21st century, and how all of these constitutions provide what are called positive rights, meaning that they're these kind of active rights, like the right to an equal education, or the right to health care, or the right to a minimum standard of living. All of these constitutions also include gender, and in some cases explicitly race, so that you're actively protected by the Constitution. Our Constitution doesn't exactly operate that way. We have the 14th Amendment, which guarantees equal protection to everyone, but
it's also written vaguely,
it's
right?
written vaguely. It's not explicit the way many of these positive rights constitutions are. So I began over time just questioning, I grew up like many of us. I mean, I was a super debate nerd. I was like deep into the NFL, which is the National Forensics League, not football. And I was like, I was just like an evangelist for the Constitution. I looked at it like the Bible, and I think—
How did that happen?
I don't know. Just like my dad's a history teacher. He was a high school history teacher. My mom was a debate coach. I was like very, I don't know,
Your parents' child.
Clearly. I was my parents' child, yeah. I mean, I was such a nerd. I actually just found this, my mom sent me this box filled with memorabilia, and one of them is like a love letter from like another debater that I met on the circuit, where he's just like, Heidi, I've been looking at the Amendment 2 for a while, and I just want to tell you these important things. I was like, wow, he's just writing me a love letter about the Constitution. Anyway.
Wait, do you remember receiving and reading that letter and what your thoughts were?
I had no memory of it.
Because I really want to see like the young Heidi's like, oh my God,
really,
Amendment 2.
Really hot. The Second Amendment is a woo. Anyway, I guess I was very— I really believed it's the greatest piece of political writing in the world. And now, performing the play night after night, I just have a lot of— I've begun to question that, and I have a lot of questions about what it means. What it means that we're still living by a document that was created by, yes, they were brilliant, but white men, many of whom were slaveholders, and who deliberately allowed that, to be part of the founding of our country. I just wonder what it means that that's still the thing we live by.
So what do you think when you hear of a Supreme Court justice who says that they're an originalist?
So my personal opinion is that, so if you're an originalist, you see the document as a kind of neutral document, right? It's designed primarily to protect us from the government, to, allow us to live with as much quote unquote liberty as possible. But to me, that's looking at the document as a kind of neutral document, like its job is to not interfere with our lives. But I don't think there is such a thing as neutrality. And it seems to me at this point in our country, given the inequality our country was birthed out of, that to be neutral at this moment in our country is actually to perpetuate violence. Yeah. And I think that's the problem with reading it as an originalist text. Because if you decide to be originalist about it, then what are you saying? that we want to live by the same values that the men who created this document lived by, because they had a lot of problems.
That's what I've never understood about
Yeah.
the originalist argument and why anybody gets behind it.
Yeah.
It seems like you would only get behind it if you solely care about protecting the status quo. But even
Yes.
then, the status quo now is different from
Yeah.
what was the originalist in the moment.
Yes,
so what are
it
you
is.
protecting?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's one thing that I think your piece talks so wonderfully about, which is about who founded the document and what did the document look like then
Right.
and what it would look like now if,
Yes.
if we did not make any kind of improvements whatsoever.
Right.
And there is a part of the show that argues for the outright abolishment
Yes.
of the Constitution, which I'm a fan of. I say let's roll. What has it been like to present that to an audience? Because it's one of those things that is sacred for a lot of people. And
Yeah.
they don't even know why.
Yeah.
They just know that they're supposed to be like, well, that's America and that's the Constitution. And then to be told that maybe we should abolish it kind of throws them out of whack.
Yes. Let me say, for the record, I don't think we should abolish it. I think it's actually, I'm in a position of incredible privilege even to be able to like have that thought experiment. I think it would be so dangerous for so many people who are not as privileged as I am. So, but I do like arguing it because I feel like it's a way to question all the things we hold sacred about it. It's just a little way of like taking a knife to the sacred cow. And what I do believe is that we need amendments. I believe we need an equal rights amendment. I believe I would argue for a process by which we amended the Constitution to give more positive rights, to more actively address the inequality in this country.
You know, you took 10 years to write the play, right? Or to
Yes.
really workshop it and to figure it out.
Yes.
I love hearing stories like this because I think so often, I mean, audiences, when they go see a movie or they listen to a piece of music or they see a play, it feels, they don't know that took 10 years to make or
Right.
3 years to make. And it feels like they just got up on stage and they wrote something and started performing. You know, you have no idea the process of development that went into it. So what was it like for you? What did you feel like you had to develop over the course of these 10 years? Were all the ideas not there initially and you had to find them over the course of these 10 years?
Yeah, I had to find the ideas, but most importantly, I had to talk to constitutional scholars. I had to read books. I had to try to understand. I don't know if you all have listened to Oye.com. I don't know if you listen to More Perfect. It's one of my favorite shows. But if you can go to Oye.com and listen to all the Supreme Court cases that have ever been argued since recording existed. And I listened to just hundreds of hours of Supreme Court cases, like trying to understand how they came to some of the decisions they came to. So it was very research heavy in that way. And also because I'm a layperson, despite my champion debate pass, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a constitutional scholar. I had to do a lot of work even to grasp some of the concepts that had affected my life and the life of the people in my family. That's what I found most fascinating, actually, is like listening to these legal cases. And the arguments are so complicated and often sound like they're in a different language. And you're like, I don't know what strict scrutiny is. I don't know what this means. I don't know what this means. And then you realize that these decisions have made a profound impact on your own life. And yet we don't, I think most of us, I know I certainly don't really understand how these decisions get made or why.
So strict scrutiny or the word shall, which is
Yes.
something that you talk about in your show. How
Yeah.
often did you find when listening to these hours and hours and hours of Supreme Court
Yeah.
cases that often sort of insignificant words were used in order to craft a decision based upon what was obviously a preconceived notion or idea on the part of some judges?
I mean, all the time. I mean, that's the thing I found most interesting. One, if you listen to the recordings, just like the human comedy of it. I mean, some of the arguments are terrible. Like, some of the, I'm like, I know these people are smart, but this is a really confused argument. And then also just the fact that in listening to them, I did realize it is like a religious text in a sense, where I feel like there are ways in which you can just look at the Constitution, take what you already believe, and then make it back you up. And I did notice that in many, many cases.
Was that frustrating to hear? Because the Constitution is supposed to be this thing that is, I mean, that's why someone says that they're an originalist,
Right.
because the Constitution is this thing that has all of the rules clear and put there for them.
Right. Yeah, it was frustrating, and I think it's one of the things that also made me feel like, what would it mean to have a positive rights constitution where it's said explicitly, you know, you have to be given equal education, you have to be, you know, healthcare has to be available to everyone. You explicitly cannot discriminate against people on the basis of sex, race. You know, what would it mean to just be clearer? Because I do feel like right now there's a little bit of a sense where you look at it and it's like a, you know, it's like a crystal ball or something you can kind of.
Is that why you focused on the 14th Amendment, or initially started? Because there's something about the 14th Amendment, at least Section 1, where you initially crafted the play from, the base and the initial idea, is that yes, it's a negative amendment, but at the same time it is kind of providing positive rights in some way.
Yes.
It is like the government shall not take away any land.
Right.
So you have the right to land, essentially.
I mean, the 14th Amendment does, I mean, that was after the Civil War. Its purpose was, in fact, to go in and actively make sure that people, and particularly former slaves, were protected. I mean, it overturned Dred Scott versus Sanford. Its whole point was to come in and say, actively try to make things more equal. The reason I focused on it at first is I was just like looking for ways my own life had been personally affected by the Constitution. And so the 14th Amendment is very powerful. And the 14th Amendment, Section 1, they used to decide a lot of cases having to do with female bodies. So birth control, Griswold versus Connecticut, abortion, Roe versus Wade, those things which had deeply affected my life. And then they also have tried to address domestic violence using this amendment, this section of the amendment, unsuccessfully. So looking at those three things that had a huge impact on my own life is how I came to focus on the 14th Amendment.
And sort of how it can be used for and or against you, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Please go back to workshopping this. What did you have when you first started performing it? Because you started with a monologue or two, right?
Yeah. All I had when I first started performing it was the prepared speech. So my speech when I was at 15 was called The Crucible of the Constitution, and I think that's just because I'd played Elizabeth Proctor in The Crucible, and I thought that seemed like a fun, I don't know why I picked that metaphor, but that's all I had. So I called my mom to say, can you send me the speech?
Wait, can we go back to that? Because that metaphor works.
Oh no, it's great.
So much of what the play is about is the treatment of women and how the Constitution responds to women.
Yes.
And The Crucible is about what it's about.
Is.
And
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I have some quibbles with that play, but
Fair.
yeah. So I called my mom and asked her if she could send me my prize-winning speech, and she had thrown it away, she said. So I decided to kind of recreate it based on what I remembered. So for a long time, I was just performing this 10-minute speech about the Constitution. I will say this, however, I just went to meet with Ira Glass for This American Life, and he called my mom and asked her if she could look for the speech again, and she did, and she found it.
For Ira, not for you.
For Ira, not for me. And for 10 years, I've been working on this whole project, which is based in the fact that I have to resurrect a speech she can't find, and she just sent it to me, and it's really good. It's way better than the thing I wrote.
Really?
Yeah. I feel like she probably helped me write it, and that's why it was so good. But
so you had that, and I read that you basically met with an actor for a few weeks as well and created personal stories, because part of the show, part of the wonderful element of the show, it's hard because if you haven't seen it, I don't want to give things away, but is when you start incorporating other people's stories of trauma, personal trauma, and how, in some ways, how the Constitution relates to them or protects them.
Yes.
But tell me what these stories that you and this actor traded, you don't have to tell me what they were because they're personal, but how they helped you.
Well, so I have, the play is actually three people. I have a man, a white cis man in the play who plays an American Legion judge and then transforms into something else. And then I have
wonderful.
He's fantastic. And then I have two young high school debaters. So I bring out real teenage debaters at the end of the play to debate constitutional issues with me. two incredible young women, Thursday Williams, Rosdely Ciprian, and they're both real champion debaters. So what I did to work on the play with them is everyone's part is sort of personalized for them. And I spent a lot of time interviewing all the other actors and taking down their stories and then kind of shaping their stories to fit with the material of the play. So a lot of it has to do with like, how are you affected by the things we're talking about in the play? Where are you from? With the young women, they have basically total control of their story. I only want them to share what they feel comfortable sharing. But we basically did some storytelling workshops together. And
when you were doing those workshops, how far along in the process were you, and what did you know that the play wanted to be when doing that?
Right. I always knew I wanted a real teenage debater to come out. I wanted someone who, was my age when I did this contest. I didn't know what would happen, like what that meant yet. And so for a while, I just worked with this amazing debater, Rosdely. We just worked together, like trying different things. I wrote material for her. We tried that out. We did practice debates until we finally landed on the big finale of our play, which we kind of came to together.
Really? And what about with the other actor?
With the other actor, I was just in rehearsal one day when we were developing the play, and I said, at this point in the play, I'm really tired of talking. I feel really overwhelmed by some of the stories I've been sharing. Is there anything you could talk about here? And I was working with a different actor at the time. He was really wonderful, and he had actually...
That's what you say in the play, actually.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm pretty transparent in the play.
Yeah.
That's really what happened, is I was just like, I'm tired. And it's a point in the play. I mean, the play starts out quite funny, and then it goes down a more difficult path. And it's a point in the play when I'm talking about centuries of male violence and of legal violence toward female bodies. And I was just like, it's too much. And also I felt like, you're up here with me. Why don't you help? Can you share this burden with me a little bit? And he was like, absolutely. And then we worked on finding a story. Yeah.
Oh, where did you get the courage to be so fluid about finding your vision? Because I think so often people are like, this is the vision and this is the play.
Yeah.
Whereas with this, I mean, clearly when we see it on stage, it feels quite fluid as well. As you said, it's transparent.
Yeah.
But when did you realize that the process had to be that way as well?
I mean, I knew the whole time, but I felt like the whole time I was following my intuition. Like I never was quite sure what it wanted to be. And in part because I was talking about such personal material, it was so scary to me that I kind of just had to grope around in the dark while I was making it. But also I had just spent 4 long years working only in TV. I had taken a break from theater. I had written for shows like Nurse Jackie and Billions.
You wrote that great episode of
I Love Dick
that everybody
yes.
praises. It's a wonderful episode.
Yeah. So in TV, you can't work this way, right? You've got to have an outline. You have to know what you're doing. Everything is very like rule oriented. There are definite rules to storytelling structure, which I guess we did break a little bit in I Love Dick. But I was just like, I want to make something that can only happen in the theater. I want it to be live and loose and messy and improvisational. I don't want to know where I'm going. I don't want to have to make these decisions ahead of time. So in a way, I was ready to do something different.
So then how did you know when you were done?
I don't know if I'm done.
I mean, like you've been doing this, you've been rehearsing it, you've been workshopping
I still change it.
Really?
I do change. I mean, not much now. Now the structure is pretty set. It has been for about a year. But, people still come to the fantastic thing is like people come to the show now and they give me new pieces of information. So I'm like Gloria Steinem came to the show and we had a long conversation after. And then I was like, oh, if I were to sit down with her, I think she would give me a lot of notes. But she told me this thing which I didn't know about actually, which I'm embarrassed because I've been working on this a long time, which is about the Iroquois Confederacy. That apparently when Ben Franklin met with them, he met with them as a kind of model for our Constitution because they had 6 nations. It was like they had a very sophisticated government. And apparently he brought a draft or an idea of what our Constitution was gonna be to these leaders. And the first thing they said was, where are your women? which I didn't know. So I've been looking.
You talk about the egalitarian nature of native tribes.
That has to do with the indigenous communities where I grew up.
Yeah.
But I feel like maybe next week I'll finally be able to get that piece of information into the debate.
Really?
Yeah. I'm always like adding little pieces of information.
But when it came to the entire structure, was there a moment where, because you'd been, as you said, digging around in the dark for so long, where you knew that you had it? Or did it take somebody else being like, Heidi, we got it now. I think we got it here.
I think I realized in front of the audience, actually. The audience, before I did it for a live audience, I didn't know what it was. And then a couple years ago, I did a first presentation of it. And that's when I started to be able to hear what I still needed to do, what was missing. But I don't think I really fully felt like it was, the structure is now complete, even if I add little things. And I think I realized that in September at New York Theater Workshop.
But it's still such a different beast, I would imagine, than staging, a 4-person drama that has 2 acts or something like that, right?
Where you can,
which you've written. I mean, and I think you can see essentially in that, even on the page, the way that the arc works and how you can shape it, and you kind of follow rules a little bit to create that. Where with this, you're breaking essentially every rule possible while still trying to maintain an emotional arc.
Yes.
Yeah. Let's hear a question right here.
Hi, how are you?
I'm well, thank you.
All right. So how has your previous knowledge of the Constitution influenced your writing in TV, Nurse Jackie, Billions?
Oh, that's really interesting. That's a great question. So I will say this, I don't know about the document itself, but the contest involved extemporaneous speaking. Like you had to draw an amendment from a hat and like give a speech about it. So you had to think quickly, okay, what's the story here? What's gonna be my little metaphor? How am I gonna make something out of this? So I feel like that definitely had an effect on, or it helped me learn to become a writer.
You're good in a writer's room.
I'm good in a writer's room, right. I can look at something quickly and say like, okay, I think this is the story I see. Yeah.
Next question.
Hi.
Right here.
Hi.
So you mentioned gaining your interest in the Constitution when you were younger, and also now on your show bringing in other members of the young adults from the debate team.
Yes.
So I wanted to know what would you suggest, or what would be your advice to other young adults that may not know much about the Constitution?
I love that question. This is funny. So there's this book that I grew up studying called Your Rugged Constitution. And in some ways, it's kind of a constitution for dummies that I found very helpful when I was 15 years old. It has like little pictures. It breaks down every amendment and article and explains how it works. I would suggest that to anybody. I think it's a great, fun primer on the Constitution. There's also a great high school textbook called Fault Lines in the Constitution, which I read as an adult and had all the adults in our rehearsal room read, and I learned so much from that book as well. I just do wish it would be taught more in schools, but yeah.
It's kind of it's sort of taught as this thing that's like, it's boring, but you gotta know, but we gotta tell you
When I
about
actually
it.
think it's so fascinating, and it's filled with so much human drama, but yeah.
That's amazing, that Gloria Steinem Iroquois story. I never heard that. That's
I know.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Do you know what
I probably got some things wrong about it, so look it up. Don't take my word.
Do you know
for
what Ben Franklin said when they were like, "Where are the women?"
I don't know what his answer was.
I don't know. I think I have time for one more.
Yeah.
Hi. So I remember you mentioning about positive amendments and positive changes to other constitutions. So I'm wondering, what are the immediate positive changes you would like to see in our Constitution?
So yes, it's not just positive changes. So it's what's called positive rights, which I just learned about. Positive rights meaning they're like active rights. So for example, I believe we should have an amendment that guarantees health care to people. I really would love an amendment that protected the environment actively. Those things would be considered positive rights. I feel like the amendment and health care would be my first 2 choices. Yeah.
There's a huge part of the country that disagrees with
I
making
know.
this amendment, unfortunately.
Many members of my family disagree with me, but I just like, if we don't take care of the environment, I don't know what happens. So
Yeah, we don't have a planet. We don't have a world.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a very simple equation
Yeah.
that we're actually sort of seeing work itself out right now
Yes.
without any help on our part.
Yeah.
Actually, a lot of help on our part. Heidi, I love the show
Thank
so
you.
much. It's genius. You're amazing. Congratulations. It's up until the 30th of December, right,
Yep.
at the Greenwich Playhouse
Yep.
Theater, just around the corner here at the on Barrow
Barrow
Street.
Street, yep.
Everybody give a huge round of applause for Heidi Schreck and go see what the
Thank you
Constitution
so much.
means to me.
Thank you for coming.
It's incredible.
Thank you.